Well, yesterday was the opener of fishing season up here in this neck of the woods. And so I'm wondering how many of you got out? A few people got out? No, not as many. I guess everybody who got out is probably out again this morning, huh? Okay, so here's the $1,000,000 question. How did you do? Did you catch any, Ryder? No? Oh, bummer. How about you, Rob? No. Okay, Pete, you got one. Yay! Oh, you caught 3. Oh, you lost 3, caught 1. Oh, at least you got one. What were you using?
Leeches.
Leeches?
Ask Kevin.
Oh.
Yeah, I had guests in my boat. We got 10 fish.
You got 10 fish. Hey, all right. So some people, you went to Lake Thompson? Yeah? Did you go to the hot spots? Oh, man. I know Lake Thompson, so I'm going to have to compare notes with Ryder after the service today. That's right. That's right. Well, in the gospel reading, Peter declares, "I'm going fishing." What's the reply? We'll go too. You should already just know that one, right? Actually, there's some shirts that say, "I'm going fishing," and then you're supposed to say, "and I'll go too." That's the response that comes from that. But in the Gospels, fishing is one of the primary images that the Gospels use to talk about the work of the church. Isn't that interesting? Fishing is one of those primary images. And when they are meeting with Jesus here in John chapter 1:21, they've moved from Jerusalem up to the northern part of the country. They're in Galilee. Galilee, one of the big features there is the sea. The Sea of Galilee. In the Gospel of John, it's the Sea of Tiberias. That's the same thing. It's actually a lake. It's 13 by 8. It's not really a sea, but it is very central to the culture. It's fishing territory. It's fishing culture up there. Just to kind of illustrate a few things about that, a guy named Mendel Nunn, many years back, researched the sea, and he found 16 harbors. So these are all harbors around the lake here, and they're all fishing encampments. So boats would go out, and then they'd bring their catch in, and they would process their catch there. So a lot of fishing, 16 harbors on a lake that's 13 by 8 miles. A lot of fishing activity going on there. I actually came across the article. You see Mendel Nunn's name cited up there. In Fisherman, it had a link to an article by Mendel Nunn. If you know anything about in Fisherman, a guy named Al Lindner. How many of you have heard of Al Lindner? Not as many people as I had hoped, but okay. Anyway, Al Lindner ends all of his TV shows by doing a devotion at the end of his fishing program. It's one of the ways in which he can share about the faith in Jesus Christ, and he does that. Anyway, there was this article there, and here's one of the things I pulled out of it. Josephus reported that 230 fishing boats regularly worked the Sea of Galilee in the 1st century. There's a lot of fishing activity going on here. If you go over there, one of the really cool things you get to see is something called the Jesus boat. In the 1980s, there were these brothers, and there was drought, so the lake level went way down, and they came across something that looked like a boat. It was a boat, and so they had to rush and try and get it pulled out of the muck and then preserved, because as soon as it hits the air, the wood starts to deteriorate. So this is what they've been able to preserve. It's about I think a 20-foot boat. Mine is 16, so that's not much longer than mine. So it's kind of amazing that they would get a whole crew in there, fishing nets, and then put their fish in there. But that's referred to affectionately as the Jesus boat, and that's the remains of it. And they've been able to piece together what that would actually look like. But fishing country, fishing culture. So it's kind of natural that the Gospels then would use this fishing imagery to talk about the work that the church is going to do, that followers of Jesus are going to engage in and be part of. Really, what the key question that John 21 is asking us to think about today is this: where does the risen Jesus show up, and how does he make himself known? I want to point to two places where Jesus shows up that it talks about in the scripture today. The first place that Jesus shows up is in the midst of our everyday lives. These disciples of Jesus were just going to work. They're fishermen, right? They just were waking up and going to work. Matter of fact, it's during the week. It's a weekday. It's not a special holy day. They're going to work. And it's while they're out there at work that Jesus shows up and reveals himself. It's not at a prayer meeting. It's not at a regularly scheduled Bible study. It's not at a worship service. There's plenty of that the Gospels and the Bible talk about. But here, one of the things I want you to see is that Jesus shows up in the midst of everyday life. One of the ways that we're trying to lift that up and kind of celebrate that here at Trinity is we're using something called True Tales from Trinity. And it's a way for us then to reach out to people like you and say, where have you seen God in your life? You know, you're kind of going through life and maybe you would say, oh, that's a coincidence, but you look at it as a person of faith and you say, no, that was God. That was God showing up. And that was God present in my life. One of the cool things is that we've got a number in the hopper that we're looking forward to sharing with you. And I'm hoping that more of you will respond to that invitation. You know, to think about when was a time when you really saw God show up. And inevitably, as I hear about that, it's in a hospital room, it's somebody going to work, it's somebody just kind of in their everyday life that they notice how God has shown up and how God is present and active. And how cool and amazing that is when we can share that with other people. It increases our awareness that Jesus is alive and active, that he's present in our lives and in our world. So one of the first ways that I want you to notice today is that Jesus shows up in the midst of our everyday lives. The second place I want you to notice that where Jesus shows up is in the midst of our failures. The disciples have gone out, they've fished all night. Why? Because that's when you fish. You fish at night because when your net's in the water, the fish have a harder time seeing it. So they fished all night long. And then they asked Jesus from shore asked them the $1 million fishing question. Well, how many did you catch? And they have to give that painful response. All fishermen hate to have to say this. I caught nothing. Nothing. We got skunked. That's how you say it in the vernacular. For me, I've had way too many skunking experiences in my life. It's a very big difference when you can say, I caught something. I'm like, Pete, that's pretty awesome that you got something. And Kevin, you got some fish in your boat. Because that's the goal of fishing, right? It's significant. But notice that Jesus speaks a powerful word into the midst of their failure. Into the midst of when they have been unsuccessful. When they've maybe felt a bit dejected and down. He speaks a powerful word, and as he speaks that powerful word, a miracle happens. They take the net and they put it on the other side of the boat. I'm thinking that Jesus had some amazing electronics to be able to look and see what kind of fish were down there. But he gets them to move, and we report that it's the miraculous catch. So many fish in the net, it's bulging, but the net doesn't burst. It's full of fish. But I don't really think that's the main miracle that we should see today. The real miracle that we should see is that the disciples listened to Jesus. Because how often does Jesus speak to us and we don't pay any attention? How often does Jesus say, you need to make a change in what you're doing, and we ignore him? How often does he speak those powerful words into our lives and we don't respond? That's maybe one of the things that the gospel wants us to see. Jesus speaks a powerful word into the midst of their failure, and it's a word of good news. It's a word of life. It's a word of renewed hope and healing. And that's amazing for them to see. Noticing how Jesus does show up and reveal himself is a main point we need to think about today. I've been thinking a lot about, my role as a follower of Jesus, and how am I out there on the front lines pointing people to Christ and sharing him? Certainly, today as I'm preaching, I get an opportunity to do that. But I've been more thinking about kind of in my personal walk. A year and a half ago, one of my good friends from college, I was the best man at his wedding. I got news that he had cancer, and it's the bad kind of cancer. It was all over in his body. He went in and he had a surgery to remove part of his intestine, part of his liver, one of his kidneys, his lymph nodes, and I can't remember what else they took out. Thankfully, he survived that. He started on a treatment. I think he was on oral chemo. And, it was tough, but he was kind of making it. I had a chance to see him over a Christmas break and got to visit with him. He looked pretty good considering what he had been through. Before he had gone into surgery, I said, is there anything I can do? And this is how he talks. He said, well, you can lift one up to the man upstairs. I said, I'll do that for you. And so anyway, he's going along, and then right before Easter, I get a text message from one of our buddies that he had a stroke. And it was pretty scary. It's like it was pretty massive, and we don't know what's going to happen. Well, thankfully, he was able to recoup enough. It affected his vision somewhat and some of his mobility. He's in rehab now. He's at a point where he can text short messages. So I'm thinking, I'm one of his good friends. I'm a pastor. What word of hope, faith can I speak into this? And here's the best thing that I came up with. I said, Brian, his name is Brian. Brian, I want you to know that I've been talking to my boss about you a lot lately. I hope that'll send some good vibes your way. And he said, thanks, man. And that's kind of where we're at now. I share that story to say it's sometimes challenging to know. I mean, that my good friend and his buddies, I don't even think they knew it was Easter. Just to let you know kind of where they're at. And it's challenging to speak. But here's my hope. That through whatever words I can cobble together, through perhaps some of his experiences that he's having in this time where the bottom has fallen out, and through his journey, my hope is that somehow he'll be able to say this: it's the Lord. It's the Lord's presence in his life, and how powerful that is. How powerful that is for us as people of faith to be able to share that with another human being. And it's not just something that we are to casually do. It's something that we are to embrace. And sometimes we got to fumble our way through it. Sometimes we got to feel our way through it. But ultimately we know that Jesus is going to be working through those interactions. And whatever ways that he can make happen, we hope that he is going to be revealed to people for his glory, his mercy, and his goodness. Amen.